complete confusion. That's the current state of the world as I see it. When you look at the conversation that's going on, it's so evident that everyone from all the different sides is deeply confused. I think there's some people that aren't, and those are the only people that I would say are a relative constant and don't have some sort of free fall occurring. But that is, if we're looking at the Western world, and then specifically America, the United States of America, they are the only ones, and I'll discuss them in a separate video. But if you look at so much of what's going on the right and the left, minus traditional conservatives, the group that I think is consistent, minus traditional conservatives, it's just complete free fall, complete confusion, trying to cope and react and adjust to the world as everyone is being presented with it. I think if you look at the average person on the street that isn't constantly thinking about politics, isn't constantly trying to figure out what's going on with our reality and our existence and the way the world is moving, the average person isn't thinking about much of this stuff, and they may not even be wrapped up in much of this stuff. They're pretty consistent. But we're talking about the thought centers. Or when I'm talking about the thought centers, I'm talking about where are people having the big discussions? Where are people, what are the movements? What is the motion? Because ultimately those thought centers bring people and drag people along with them. And it seems that just everywhere I look, there's so much confusion. Confusion in purpose, confusion in what is our purpose, what is their purpose, confusion in what is what we stand for. And we may be a multitude of things. But what is it that you stand for, or one stands for? And what are your ethics? What is your morality? Where does your morality come from? Where do your ethics come from? And what change or non-change, what future do you hope to see in the world? It seems that everywhere people possibly haven't even thought of these questions. And if they do think about these questions, they're looking over them and moving past them, looking past them, and having just a simply intellectual argument, which I have no problem with. I love having intellectual arguments and intellectual discussion, and I love arguing from, I guess, a morally irrelevant position, simply arguing just to argue, simply debating a point just to debate a point, not to try to further some moral agenda. But if that's all you have, then you have no moral, you have no ethic. You might, but it's not being represented in your discussion. So I think there's a few tiers to confusion and lostness, or I guess lostness is the best way to describe it. There's the tier where people have lost their sense of self, lost their way, and they don't have the answers. They don't know what the answers, they don't even know what the questions are. They don't even know the question to ask. But they're upset and they want change. They want something to change. They want to radically shake up the system. They want to tear the system down. They want to break it down. They want a new system. This group, I would say, is the most lost group. Maybe the easiest to sway group, but completely lost. And it seems to dominate an increasing percentage of the discussion today. Then there's the next group, which I would say is also lost, because while they're having incredibly intellectual discussion and discussing, or at least trying to discuss some big topics, or not even big, just discuss topics and have an actual discussion about, actually get into it instead of just swallowing wholesale whatever you're told. But many of these kinds of conversations revolve around simply the conversation, and that's it. There's no hope for a moral change. There's no hope for an ethical change. There's no moral stance. It's just a intellectual stance, which again is totally fine, but if that's all you have, it's not enough to keep you morally consistent and morally strong and it's not a moral foundation, it's not an ethical foundation. And I think there's a whole bunch of discussion which is incredibly worthwhile, but it's missing an ethical, moral component. And the conversation exists essentially just for the conversation. And the only reason why many are having it is just for the conversation. And I think this is what we're missing. I think that people have we're just lost. People are deeply confused in this 21st century. And not older people, not baby boomers, not older people, but younger people. People maybe under 35, 30, under 35, under 40, 35, 30, and under seem to be completely confused in the Western First World. And when I say Western First World, obviously I mean Western Europe, America, Canada, Australia, etc. In some places more than others. And I think that those kind of conversations that are more specific will come in other videos, in other discussions. But in the most general sense, there seems to be a deep lostness and confusion, which is spiraling towards chaos. And it's understandable in many ways. I think the paths that led us here, they make sense. I understand people's reaction in many ways because they're looking for anything to hold on to, but they don't know what to hold on to. It's somewhat similar to someone trying to swim if they've never learned how to swim. They know they want to swim. They know that they want to survive. They know that they want to make it to shore and stay above the water, but they don't know how to. And I think that's the deepest concern in all of this, is that there seems to be a complete free fall occurring. And people are trying to figure out the answers, but they just can't get there for a whole host of reasons, I think. But I think that one of the first steps to moving in a direction in which we can honestly start bettering our society and bettering ourselves and moving towards a more, I don't want to say stable scenario, because I don't think anything is ever really stable, but we're always just moving in directions. But if we can move towards a more stable direction, and I think that's different than saying move towards a stable place, because eventually that stability will be unseated because people will get sick of the stability. But it's an inevitable sort of change, I think, ultimately. But if we can move towards a more stable place, I think the way to do that would be for people, younger people having this discussion, these kinds of discussions, these big discussions, trying to figure things out, would be to start thinking in moral and ethical terms. And I think that people need to start having some real discussions about where their ethics come from, where their morals come from, and the betterment of the world. And what kind of world does one hope to see? What kind of world does one want to see or hope to live in. And without addressing those issues, without addressing those keys of ethics and morals and what you want to see in the world, I think that we're missing the point. It's talking about something without talking about it. It's building the core, the shell of a house, without filling the house with any of the workings to make sure the stove works, or the shower works, or the water runs, or the lights turn on. And I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why we dance around this and why people are shy to discuss these sorts of moral and ethical implications and imperatives, and instead just dance around the issue and dance around the discussion and talk in somewhat of a removed and a removed way, a way in which you're only speaking intellectually because you have no skin in the game when you speak that way. You can always argue or say, I'm just arguing this. I'm just arguing. I'm just debating, etc., etc. But we need to start thinking, or I think we need to start thinking about ethics, about morals, and where are we going? What do we want to see? What kind of society do we want to live in? And where is our moral and ethical compass? And I think this is what much of the discussion is missing. This is something that is truly lacking. People are talking about edgy topics and very complex issues and debating very edgy conversations because they like debate, they like discussion, they like exploring, and they like learning. All amazing things, but that without an ethical framework, without a moral base, without a shell of morality, it's missing a point, it's missing something. And it's not the be-all, end-all. That can be a means to the end. But it's not the end, and it's not... There's no meat there. There's no core. And I think until we start discussing, and more young people start discussing, these real serious discussions and issues, and start discussing it in a meaningful way. Where do morals come from? Where do ethics? What kind of morality? What is morality? What is our morality? What do we want to see? And how does that frame all the other discussions that we have? Until young people start having these discussions in an intellectual way, we're going to be continuing down the same dangerous path. This path of free fall, this path of confusion, and a path of ambiguity. Because without a roadmap to navigating the world, we're all going to be lost. And you don't have to talk about this in morose terms. One doesn't have to discuss these things in sad and melancholy manner. And when I say these things, I'm referring to law, governance, religion, morality. How do you impose morality on others? To what degree do we impose morality? Then on the specific issues that many people discuss today, feminism, men's and women's roles, the way that men and women interact, terrorism, multiculturalism, defense of nation states. What is the United States of America, and how do we want to sustain it, and how do we want to preserve it, and how do we want to continue it? How do we deal with multiculturalism in a way in which is both reasonable and also cognizant and aware that not all cultures mix and not all cultures blend together equally, And not all cultures complement each other. Some are diametrically opposed to each other. How do we negotiate all of this, all these discussions, taxes, welfare, common good, self-interest, all of these issues, all of these discussions within a moral and ethical framework, and not just discussing it for the sake of discussing it? How do we discuss this in a serious manner? Because there's a deeply, deeply lacking seriousness today. Everything is just the bants. Everything is a catty response, a catty retweet, a snarky way to reply to something, a snarky way to comment on something, making fun of this, making fun of that. And there's a place for all that. Absolutely, 100%. But until we start approaching everything with the serious tone it deserves, we're missing the point in where on a rail car heading down a hill at 100 miles an hour, just look at the way in which people discussed the French election in 2017 between Le Pen and Macron. There was such a lacking, there was such a dearth of seriousness. It was all either jubilation on one side, snarkiness on one side, and complete unseriousness on one side. And when I say one side, I don't mean one side, I mean all sides. So few people were discussing the true seriousness of this. You would see people on the left being somehow people in the United States of America, not French citizens, not having any skin in the game of the French election, meaningful skin in the game, and somehow being jubilant that Macron won. Tweeting out things, writing things, Facebook posting things, writing things, memes of bye-bye, bitch. One, if you're not even a citizen of this country, why do you care so much? Two, what? Just what? Three, I doubt you could name 4 policy points from either of these candidates. And 5, your lack of seriousness in negotiating and coming to grips with the fact that the right is only going to get stronger as long as the left keeps doing exactly that, saying bye-bye, bitch, mocking all of these concerns that people on the right have. And then you see on the right, you see people commenting on the French election who know absolutely nothing about it. And it's evident they know nothing about it because they'll post things or they'll write things or they'll share things that clearly make it evident that they do not understand. They either do not understand some of the basic tenets of liberty and freedom, don't understand how France as a republic exists and what are some of the key tenets of the French Republic, and just want to get behind someone because they want to be on a side. And that, again, is also not helping anything. The French election was a serious election. I would say it's 2017 might be one of the most serious elections in the Western First World in the past couple years, and will be in the coming few decades. And a complete unseriousness. People appearing, and I'm not referring to people, your random dude or friend down the street commenting on this. I'm referring to quote-unquote journalists, commentators, pundits, commenting on the French election for about 2 hours the day of it, and then never talking about it again. Sharing their opinions, snarky and unserious, as though they are somehow qualified to discuss this, when they hadn't written anything, shared anything, spoken on anything related to the French election ever, maybe. And they all of a sudden become professionals for 2 hours, then stop talking about it. And when they do talk about it, it's not even with seriousness, because if they were to discuss it with at least seriousness, I might lambast the fact that I'm not sure. I might criticize or wonder about their lack of knowledge, or if what their knowledge base is, etc., what their qualifications are to discuss it. But at least they'd have a seriousness. But coming in and offering some completely unserious commentary for 2 hours the day of the election is not helping anything. And this happened all over. This is the kind of unseriousness that is leading to disaster. And again, American citizens who are not French citizens, are not voting, have almost no skin in the game, seemingly having huge opinions on France. And not just huge opinions as in they have some real legitimate discussion points in which they want to, some policy concerns, and they follow the European politics and they follow all sorts of world politics. No. Just some real emotional opinions, like quote unquote, bye bye bitch, to Marine Le Pen. This is just leading to disaster. And until we start becoming serious, having meaningful conversations about the future we are going to see in the world, morally and ethically, we're going to be careening towards disaster. And people on the left, and to a lesser extent on the right, need to start having these serious discussions. But still, on the right as well. People need to start getting past just the bants, getting past just the discussion, getting past just the having an edgy discussion to feel edgy and feel intellectual, and start drilling down into their morality and their ethics, because that's where we really need to get to in order to help ensure that the world moves in a positive direction and stays positive, and we stay a positive force for good in the world. And until we do that, we're just careening towards disaster.